So today we're going to talk about how to take 3D models that you've modeled in Maya and paint them in applications such as Photoshop or other 2D painting software. Here's a cartoon rocket that was created for a modeling project not too long ago. This technique does require to UV the object, which is not going to be covered at all in this video. But if I click on this object, you can see and open up the UV editor by going to UV editor, and let me drag this from the other screen. You can see that this object has been UV'd. You do need to UV an object for this method to work. I've already taken a quick kind of run at making some color textures for this, just to kind of show you what I mean. So you can see here is a cartoony, very lightly textured rocket ship here, and I want to go through the steps of how to do this. If you don't have programs like Substance or other 3D painters, and to show you how you can use, again, like Photoshop or any other 2D application to work back and forth to do this. So if you're working with Maya, Maya is a project-based system. I do strongly recommend that you've at least created a project, though it's not required. Again, I'm just a big proponent of keeping your files organized, and that's one way to ensure that happens. So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and create a project. To create a project, it's found under File, Project Window, and it's going to open up a dialog. This dialog allows you to name the current project and give it a location, and all these other folders you shouldn't mess with, but you could give them individualized names if you wanted to. You can see I already have Cartoon Rocket Ship as the name of my project, and I've already just set it to the desktop. And all you would have to do is click New, and then you would type in those things. So I'd just change whatever I want to call it. I would pick the location by clicking on the folder icon. It would let me browse through the system browser and put it wherever you want, and then you would hit accept. I'm going to cancel this. And what this does is it creates a series of folders like this. So the cartoon rocket ship, and again, this is one I've already created, but it would do the exact same thing. It creates a series of folders, and what you should do is you should throw your Maya scenes into a scenes folder. Your textures that go into Maya would go into source images folder. And anything Maya, and this is where it gets important here, anything that Maya spits out will usually go into the images folder. Now again, if you didn't do this, you will have plenty of opportunities to manually point Maya where do you want to save these files, but this is by default where it's going to want to put them. All right, so that's how you create a project. It's best to do that, but again, not required. So there's a couple things we can do here. I want to show you a couple things, like for example, how to export out your UV map. And I also, while I'm here, this is a great opportunity to also talk about creating AO maps as well. So let's start with the AO map. To get an AO map on an object, it's actually fairly simple. You select the object or objects if there's multiple of them, and you just right-click and assign new material. When the material dialog opens up, you go to the Arnold, Shader, and AI Ambient Inclusions. It's the very first one on the list. And then your object will turn solid gray. Now, as a bonus, if you were to actually just render this using Arnold, which is what I have it currently set, it would just render, and it's currently rendered on my other screen. Shouldn't take too long. But as it's rendering here, this is great for 3D modelers if you don't want to have to throw a texture on an object. This is a great way of just, you want to show off a model and it, not use gray. An ambient inclusion map is great for this. And technically this doesn't even need to be UV to do this. Now an ambient inclusion captures self-shadowing in areas. So like for whenever where there's a lack of light from no particular one area, that's what the ambient occlusion map will capture. So it's really good at those recesses and getting those shadows in there. So this is what the ambient occlusion does. And this is valuable to get it out of its own map with, that way you can control this, and you can actually keep this separate or burn it into your texture map, which is what we're going to do here. But a lot of times certain 3D game engines, you can actually leave it separate and control it within the game engine itself, which is great. All right, so how to actually render this out as a texture, not just a render, is you select the object, you go to Arnold, and you go to Utilities, and you do Render Selection to Texture. And what this will do is open up a quick dialog, and again, it's going to want to output this into the projects folder. Mine's called Cartoon Rocket Ship Images folder, or you can click the little three dots here and give it any location. See, there it is. I'm going to cancel that. Resolution 512 is pretty low. Again, we generally keep these in powers of 2, but if you were to do something like 2048, that'd be a lot higher, a lot cleaner. It would take a lot longer to render, of course. If you find it that it's noisy, there's little dots and pixels, everywhere, you can increase the camera samples to help reduce that. And the rest of the stuff I would probably leave as the defaults as you render this. You render this out, and it will render out a map. I'm not going to do this for the sake of time. I've already, cooking magic. I've already kind of gone ahead and created this. And it'll export out into the image folder or wherever you tell it an EXR file, which Photoshop can handle. And I'll come back to that one. Now, if we go back to Maya, let's go ahead and do our other map while we're here. You can actually export out your UVs to use them as a coloring guide. So I've exported the AO map. We'll take a look at that in a minute. If I go into the UV editor and look at this, this is the UVs that I've already pre-done. So we can actually export this out and again use it as a coloring guide in Photoshop. So I want this one as well. And to export out a UV, you need to have your object selected in object mode. It can't be in pieces or subcomponent mode. Or I should say, correction, you can have it in pieces, but you need to select those pieces in object mode and have them all selected. But you can't select faces, for example. So with those objects selected in the UV editor, and again, that was found under UV editor, we go to Image, UV Snapshot, and it opens up another dialog. And once again, you can put this anywhere you want, but it's going to want to go into the by default, it wants to go in the images folder. Mine is currently set to the desktop. So let's go ahead and change this to the images folder inside the cartoon rocket ship. And I usually just leave the name as out UV. So you can see I've already actually gone and done this as well. So I'm going to go to cancel that. I generally make these pretty big, and you can change the file size to whatever you want, but I usually make these simplistic JPEGs. And then once again, if I hit accept and close, it will create this, but I've already done this, so to save time, close. So when you've done that, you're going to get a pair of files as such. Now these files can be opened up in Photoshop, and they can be created in here, and they'll come in something like this. Let me go ahead and I'm in Photoshop now, and I'm going to drag and drop these in here, and you can see that we have this file here, and it would come in something like this. This is the UVs. Now, I can't go obviously in every detail of Photoshop. If you know a different program, this will work as well. Of course, you'll have very similar settings. You'll just have to use those ones. But if you're a user of Photoshop, what you do is you bring it in as a layer, and by default, it is a black image with white lines. If you set this layer to be screen by going up into the layers area, changing it to screen, what that will do is make the black pixels or the darker pixels transparent with the white pixels being opaque. And this is a great way of using this as a guideline again as the paint. I tend to also lock this layer because I have accidentally painted on this layer many times. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the lock icon right here. Now the AO map comes in and it's kind of the opposite. You can see there's the AO map, the ambient inclusion map, and it's just, it's kind of, mostly will be white, and it will have some grays and some darks. Now, a great thing about Photoshop is it has the exact opposite here. If you set this from normal, which this is what it would normally look like, to multiply, it is the reverse of the screen. White pixels and lighter pixels will become transparent, and darker pixels will be opaque. So you can use this as a shadowing technique on top of your illustration to add a lot of detail and capture those things as quite easily. And you can see as I come in here, I kind of just painted some random colors here, and these aren't that pretty, but you can see that I just paint some of the colors in here. So what you would do is you would save this out as a Photoshop file, and file, save as, and I'm just going to call this O2 for a test, and you can see all my colors, and you might want to turn off your UVs. Hey, you can leave them on if you like. It might look kind of interesting, but I'm going to go ahead and turn off my UVs. Just click on eyeball, turn them off. And then I'm going to save this out as a JPEG or some other file. Technically, you can save it as a PNG as well. But I'm just going to save this out as a JPEG. And I'm going to call this Rocket Ship 02. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right. So that file is saved into the source images folder. Technically, once again, though, it can be saved anywhere, but you generally want to try to save images again that go into Maya into the source images folder. Not because it's wrong if it's anywhere else. It's just that's where Maya's going to look for it first, and it's best to keep it contained there because Maya will generally try to look for it there on other as well at other times. All right, so if I go back into Maya, I'm going to assign a new material to this just so we can step through the whole process of how to add in it. So I'm going to right click and hold. And I'm going to assign a new material, and I'll just make it a Lambert material. Well, we can do a blend. Why not? So a blend has a little bit of specular shine to it. So I'm going to assign a blend to this. And it should automatically open up the attribute editor. If it does not, it is this little button right here. It's the middle icon in the top right. Or you can use the tab on the right side that says attribute editor and click blend. Another way of doing this, which might be even easier, is if you can just right click on the object and go to material attributes and let go. And I missed. There we go. And that'll open up the attribute there. Now, what we're messing with is, of course, color. We're going to change the color swatch. Instead of using the gray swatch, we're going to use the input connection to the right. We click on this little input. We navigate to the Create Render node. We're going to be using file textures because we're painting file textures in our 2D application. Click File. It's going to open up a node dialog called File. We click on the little folder icon. Navigate to wherever the file's kept. The first place Maya is going to look is in the Source Images folder. My example was Rocket Ship 2. And I'm going to hit Open. And you can see there is, with my very simplistic painting from Photoshop and the AO map that I added in. Remember, if you don't see this, 4 is wireframe in Maya. You just hover your mouse in here and hit the 4 key for wireframe. 5 is shaded, which you might be on. 6 is to preview with textures. Once you start adding file textures, you're previewing with textures. So make sure you hit the 6 key as well. Now what you can do is you can just Alt-Tab back and forth between Photoshop. Maybe I'll change these colors. Maybe I'll just do hue saturation. Again, this ain't really a Photoshop tutorial, but if I get Control U, change these colors to some of the random colors, and just do another Save As. I'm just going to do a Save As a JPEG. Save back over that same texture example. Replace it. And Alt-Tab back to Maya. And hit Reload. And you can see I can work back and forth. So this is a great substitute if you don't have 3D painting software. You can use your 2D application, work back and forth, and as well as paint out these ambient inclusion maps and get those however you want. And if you want to, like I said, if your 3D game engine supports it, you don't have to bake in the ambient occlusion. You can just bake it out as its own map. Or if you want to have really simplistic textures in your game, materials in your game, you can bake it into your texture painting and have that work. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Stay tuned for more tips with Maya and creating game assets.